Blessings in Jesus' name. Now, as Christians, there are two things that the Bible tells us to do. I say this regularly when I'm out preaching. And they are preach the gospel of Jesus Christ in season and out of season, and expose the unfruitful works of darkness, having nothing to do with them. So, many of the unfruitful works of darkness are implemented by the government, because the Bible says that Satan is the god of this world. So you've got to understand what that means. But we know that he's the God of the earth. We know that Yahweh is the God of the earth. So what is the world, and how does it really differ from the earth? Well, first thing we need to set a premise. God is ultimately the highest authority. So any power that anybody has is because God allows them to have it. It's not because he necessarily agrees with it, but he allows it. Now, Satan being the god of this world, what is the world? The world is the infrastructures on the earth that are governed by the devil. Now, these are, in many cases, governments, like members of state, members of parliament, members of police forces, members of local government. Satan has individuals who have chosen to serve him in all walks of life, from the bin man to the president. And he has these people situated throughout society for the purposes of manipulation, and just having men on the ground in all areas, because it's obviously strategically advantageous. So the world is anything that's a dead thing or a governing or a governance of men. So Satan can use many different things and many different churches and many different governments and many different associations. And actually, through his synagogue, he has set up many of the philanthropical agencies around. Those claiming to be philanthropical, benevolent fraternities that actually go about some charitable works. Because, of course, if they're going about charitable works, it's easier for them to hide behind those charitable works and claim that they are, in fact, only a benevolent fraternity. But it often is the case that they are an evil cabal who are hiding behind a front of a philanthropical fraternity. One example is Freemasonry. It is a criminal cabal, I believe, and I was a member of this fraternity up to the point of Master Mason, where I started to realise what it was. I started to realise this is a synagogue of the devil. Because I was asked, "What do you want?" That was the devil trying to make a deal with me for my eternal soul. And that was when I wrote my letter of resignation and left. So, needless to say, I made no deal with him. And I left the fraternity once I found out what it was. And the devil does exist there. And his demons do exist there. And so, that's what's meant by the world. The world is infrastructure on the earth, excuse me, that is governed by Satan. So these complexes, these cabals, and these convoys of different cartels, which are moving through the earth all the time under command of the devil, are building his new world structure, building the centralized power of production, so that mankind will sort of become an underskilled race of slaves. And so because they can't run their household apart from the state to the extent that it would be reasonable for them to do so, that they can remain separate of the state and not solely and wholly dependent upon them. So they're building these complexes and these infrastructures that are like societies within societies. They're called secret societies. And they have goals and agendas which are often contrary to and in conflict with the actual constitutions of the nations within which they operate. So what you end up having is you end up having a cabal running your government into the ground. So if Satan wants to bring one world order, which is pretty much has been the goal of Freemasonry since it was incepted, or since it was set up, since it was established. Now it's just another facade. Freemasonry is just another name for the synagogue of Satan, and it comes under many different costumes and guises. Knights Templar, the Catholic Church, Islam. These are all branches of the synagogue of Satan. Now, how do you know that they have a commonality? Well, now they're coming out and saying, we all worship the same God, we're just doing it differently. And it's true, they do worship the same God differently. But that God is Satan, the God of the world. Because you can't be in Jesus' camp and the devil's camp. You can't be in Adonai's camp, the God of heaven's camp, and in another one. And there's no camp of you. You're either in God's camp or Satan's camp. You don't have a camp all of your own. So there are two spiritual kingdoms. The kingdom of God, Elohim, Adonai, Yahweh, the God of the Bible, the most holy Trinity, Jesus Christ, and the Father and the Spirit. And these three are one. So you're either in that camp with God, or you're in Satan's camp. Hades, hell, the world, the synagogue. So the synagogue of Satan is a world structure which is building that one world government. So what they're trying to effectively do is usurp authority, in effect, over the constitutions of the lands, so that they can pretend for a time to operate under those flags and under those constitutions, while they effectively fight against those constitutions and legislate things, avoiding somehow the democratic processes so to do. And to give you an example, in Ireland, we have a Freemason as a president. At least that's what I was told when I was in Freemasonry, that Michael D. Higgins was a Freemason. So if the President of Ireland is a Freemason, what does he favour? The Constitution or the Freemasonic rhetoric, goal and agenda? So the point I'm making is he's not alone in that. If he's a Freemason, there are many, many different Freemasons in government and in the guards and in the judiciary and all around the walks of life. So these are working together as one unit, and they prioritise the secret society over the Irish society or the American society or the British society or wherever they happen to be. And they've been there for a long time. So their goal was to infiltrate government. Their goal was to infiltrate the state and overturn it in front of the people without the people really knowing what's happening. So I'll give you an example of how they're doing that in Ireland. They've come up with these legislatures, which they didn't come about by democratic processes. They basically just wrote legislation. Because in Ireland they say that the President can legislate anything he wants. They'll hand the President in Ireland a bill, he'll read through it and he'll enact it. So all Freemasonry had to do was get a Freemason into the president's seat, and they could start legislating for things that would ultimately strengthen their position and give them access to make change so that they could bring about their one world government. Now all they had to do was get into all the different governments around the world and systematically and simultaneously bring those governments to the same position. So that's what they're effectively doing. They're claiming to have a democratic society, but what they're doing is creating a dictatorship, because they're telling the President of Ireland, you can legislate whatever you want. Does he not have to go through a democratic process? No. You hand him the bill, he legislates it. Does it not have to be shown to be constitutional? They tell him no. They're actually telling the President of Ireland that before he legislates something as legislature, he doesn't have to check it for its constitutionality. He can if he wants. So the President of Ireland doesn't have to engage democratic society or the constitution that gives him his position. They're saying no. That's treason. Who came about this legislation, this alteration, this amendment? Who came about it? It wasn't come about by democratic processes. So it's a usurpation of power. It's an occupancy. The estate has been infiltrated, and they're not even trying to hide it anymore. So what they're doing is they're saying the President is allowed to legislate whatever he wants. And he doesn't have to check if it's constitutional or not. No. And what's more, you have to presume it is. So you're telling the President that he can incite crime? Effectively, yes. But we're giving you no certainty as to whether he has done so or not, because we're not actually testing whether it's constitutional or not. But we're telling you you can, because you still have a democracy, but effectively we won't let you. And I can tell you that's the case, because I brought a test to the High Court of the constitutionality of sections 115 and 117 of the Criminal Justice Act 2006. They scheduled it first on the list, they started testing it, and then abandoned the test. Who does that? Nobody does that. No High Court starts testing a legislature and then abandons it and nobody says anything about it, unless the country's rotten from within. So that's what's effectively happening in this country under Justice Siobhan Phelan. 31st of May 2022, Stephen Tallon versus the DPP. First on the schedule, check the constitutionality of section 115 and 117. Then what did she do? She said, Stephen, myself, was in prison for a month wrongfully. There was an injustice against him perpetrated by the state. Stephen was told that he must not speak for 2 years wrongfully, because the civil order that told him to do so was unlawfully arrived at, and therefore redundant and unlawful. That was the second injustice done against him, reduction of liberty for 2 years. So 30 days in prison, plus, and 2 years of reduction of liberty? Yes, and these came about under the sections that are number 1 on our list to test the constitutionality of, but we're going to abandon that. What? Now you have evidence that a man was treated unjustly, wrongfully imprisoned, and wrongfully had his liberties reduced for 2 years under the sections you were supposed to check for their constitutionality, and you decided it would be best to abandon that test? Even though you have evidence that something wrong happened as a result of those legislations that you were supposed to test? Yeah, we abandoned it. Any reason? No. What? Are you having a laugh? You're not even trying to hide anything anymore. You're just doing silly things, and that's it. You don't even care that people are watching anymore. They've totally lost the plot. So Miss Justice Siobhan Phelan is effectively committing a crime. Why? She has evidence that the test that she was supposed to complete was absolutely pertinent, given that 2 things came about that were unjust as a result of those sections she was supposed to check, but decided as she was ruling that those injustices occurred to abandon the test. not reschedule it, not look to have any other court address it, just abandon it. Yeah, that's what she did. And didn't make any restitution or request for compensation for the person who had 30 days of wrongful imprisonment and 2 years of reduced liberty. Yeah, pretty much that's what we're saying. In the High Court of Ireland, yeah, Miss Justice Siobhan Phelan did it on the 31st of May 2022. Check it, Stephen Talon versus the DPP. And you'll see, I think it's vlex.ie will come up, and you'll see like some kind of case law stuff, and you'll see what happened. You'll see what's number 1 on the schedule, what the final ruling of the court was, and how it makes no sense whatsoever. So they're saying, we have evidence that these sections are wrong, given that this man was wrongfully imprisoned and wrongfully had his liberties reduced. We were told to test these for their constitutionality. We said we would. We scheduled it first on the list. And then we abandoned the test, giving no reason as to why, saying it still remains an open question as to whether they're constitutional or not. But in the meantime, presume they are constitutional, even though we have evidence that they led to a man's wrongful imprisonment and wrongful reduction of liberty for 2 years in a lengthy court case. And we're not going to give him any compensation. We're not even going to say the word restitution. Try and leave it at that. What? Are you being serious? So this woman, this female judge, this judge of the High Court of Ireland, said that this man has been wrongfully imprisoned and didn't move to have the state compensate him? Yeah, therefore she committed a crime. It's her constitutional duty to motion for restitution. So she's committing a crime, not just against me, but against the Constitution. That's treason. That's actual treason. Because it's not only a betrayal of me and my rights, it's a betrayal of the Irish Constitution as a judge of the High Court. This judge didn't even mention compensation, as though it was a normal thing to just sort of, oh, well, we put you in prison for a month. Wrongfully. Yeah. We told you couldn't speak for 2 years wrongfully. Court dismissed. That's actually what happened. Oh yeah, and by the way, the legislations that we were supposed to check for their constitutionality, we didn't. We abandoned it. And they didn't feel any incumbency to try and make an excuse or anything. Nothing. That's how bold they are as criminals in our High Court. It is bad, guys. That these people think we can actually say in the High Court of Ireland that this man was wrongfully imprisoned, wrongfully had his liberties reduced for 2 years, and then just do nothing about it, not compensate him in any way. State can, effectively what they're saying is the state can put people in prison for nothing and not even compensate them for it. This judge committed a treason. This judge committed a crime. Oh, the government, the local government, the district court can tell you to stop preaching for 2 years and we won't even reprimand them or compensate you for that harm done to your life and the reduction of your liberty. Crime against your humanity and your freedoms under the International Human Rights Bill and our Constitution of Ireland and the EU Convention and all of those things. We'll just ignore that. So this judge, Miss Justice Siobhan Phelan, committed a crime and committed a treason, and actually international crime as well. So she's offending the EU Convention, the Irish Constitution, and the International Human Rights Bill. Very, very serious position for her to be in. And I'm talking about this for a long time. This is going on a long time before I mentioned her name. But on the 31st of May 2022, Miss Justice Siobhan Phelan committed a very serious crime. For no reason given, failed to test the constitutionality of sections brought before her court, which was her constitutional duty to complete, judged that I had been wrongfully imprisoned and wrongfully had my liberties seriously reduced, like not being allowed to talk, for 2 years. Didn't move for restitution or compensation, vindication of good name, restoration of property or property rights, or anything like that. Just quashed the charges. That's all she did. So she committed a treason. This is very serious. I don't think they appreciate how big this is. They're just ignoring this. They haven't even addressed it. They haven't even tried to make an excuse for their conduct. And I'm not going away. I'm not going to back off of this. No chance. And I will escalate it. But what you have to understand is, the citizen doesn't have to bring plenary proceedings to request restitution. That's not how this works. The judge has already admitted that there has been an injustice against me. So she's totally remiss in not granting restitution. That should have been her first port of call. She should have motioned for that immediately as her constitutional duty. It's written into the Constitution. And she didn't do it. She didn't do any of that. Didn't complete the test of the constitutionality of those sections. Didn't motion for restitution. Didn't reprimand anybody. Nothing. Just, we quashed it. It's a victory for you. It's a victory for me to go to prison for 30 days. It's a victory for me to have my rights reduced, to not be allowed to speak for 2 years under threat of imprisonment, and then have it quashed. That's a victory, do you think? What about all the harm done to my life? Nothing, no compensation, no restitution, no value placed on that whatsoever by that judge, even though the Constitution places value on that. Very serious value on it. But they just, meh, not good enough. And so you can see that the person who says this man has been harmed and doesn't go about making restitution, that just means compensating him, trying to make amends for the harm done to his life, the trauma and all the turmoil, the upheaval that was a ramification or a knock-on effect of all of the aforementioned injustice. Don't compensate that at all. Don't even give the man his court costs or his travel costs. Give him nothing. Don't even mention money. Just make him think he's lucky to not be going to prison because we quashed the charges. Absolutely stinking behaviour from the High Court of Ireland. Absolutely rotten. Because it is the duty of the state, when a judge recognises that the state has mistreated an individual, wrongfully imprisoned them, wrongfully reduced their liberties, to make restitution to compensate that person for the harm done to their life. That's absolutely the duty of the state. And if they don't do it, they break the law and they actually commit treason, because it's not reasonable to expect that a judge at that level in the High Court would be so inept or incompetent that they wouldn't know that. Because it's written into the Constitution. It's their job to know the Constitution, because if you want to test something, like to see if it's constitutional or in other words lawful or not, that's where you go. You go to the High Court. So it wouldn't be acceptable that they wouldn't know their responsibilities according to the Constitution, given the ruling that they had made. So it's very serious, and that's why it would be considered treason. Because it's a betrayal of the state. It's a betrayal of your rights not to make restitution, even after you've acknowledged that your rights had been infringed upon. Very, very seriously. Wrongful imprisonment for 30 days is very, very serious. The reduction of liberty to the point of not being allowed to speak for 2 years under threat of imprisonment is extremely serious. And that judge committed treason when she failed to motion for restitution and compensation. I can't express to you how serious a crime that is from that judge, Miss Justice Siobhan Phelan. It's a very serious crime. Like, it's just not good enough that she wouldn't know that. Like, she should absolutely know that if a man has been wrongfully imprisoned for 30 days, that she should compensate him for that. It's like, the money, it's not really about the money, it's about placing a value on your rights. And when you've been in prison for 30 days, like, if it wasn't for family, I would have lost my accommodation. I would have come out of prison homeless. Do you understand? So, like, it's a total upheaval. Being put in prison for 30 days is total upheaval of your life. It's a traumatic experience. I was put in quarantine for 2 weeks. I had special dietary requirements that weren't being met, so I was under eating. The first day I went in, I told them I wasn't wearing a mask, so they put me in a strip cell, in a poncho overnight. Told me I wouldn't be getting fed unless I put a mask on. They put the handcuffs on too tight, bringing me to the court, and damaged the nerve in my wrist. Smashed them down on my wrist. Then when I was in the van, turned up the heat way too high. So I'd be sweating in the van with these cuffs crushing my wrist all the way to the court. Wrongfully imprisoned. And treated like that. And then when the judge eventually from the High Court says, oh, this man was wrongfully imprisoned, no restitution, no compensation. Look how bold they are in their treasons. Look how bold they are. They don't care about your constitution. They don't care about your rights or your freedoms of liberty or speech. Because even after the judge of the High Court said this man was wrongfully imprisoned, didn't motion for restitution at all. Nothing. As though I'd be so merry that I wasn't going to prison that I wouldn't even think about it. They committed very serious treason that day in that court for a multitude of reasons. Then they had the cheek to try and appeal it to the Court of Appeal after the final date. Way far after, a month and 4 days after the final date to lodge an appeal. They lodged an appeal and it was accepted in the Court of Appeal. They wanted to overturn the quash. Did they hope that I'd forget that there was no restitution made? And just think, oh, whew, I got away with it. That the appeal wasn't, didn't change the ruling or the judgment of the High Court. Phew. I was wrongfully imprisoned for 30 days. I had my liberty reduced for 2 years under threat of imprisonment and arrest. At one stage I was told I couldn't walk down the main street. At one stage I was told I couldn't speak anywhere in Wexford County. And they don't want to make any restitution or compensation for that? Even after they ruled that it was wrongful? Are they for real? Are they actually being serious? Before that, I spent 6 days in prison in Cloverhill, and they ruled that I shouldn't have been. I was wrongfully imprisoned again. No restitution that time either. Maybe that's why they thought that they could get away with not giving me restitution the second time, because I didn't mention it the first time. And if you give them an inch, they'll try and take a mile. But there they are in the High Court of Ireland, ruling that a man was wrongfully imprisoned for 30 days and didn't compensate a cent. That will show you that that judge intended to further harm me. The judge that made the ruling intended to take the relay baton of harm against this man and carry it on. And she did it in the form of not completing the test of the constitutionality of Section 115 and 117 and not granting restitution or compensation for the injustices she acknowledged were done. Treason. A betrayal of the state, the constitution and my countrymen. The EU Convention, the Human Rights, the International Human Rights Bill, and the Irish Constitution. 3. Presiding, we'll say, enactments were totally ignored and disregarded in the judge's ruling. No restitution, no compensation. I'm still baffled as to how she thought she could get away with that. Can you imagine that? Looking somebody in the eye and saying, yes, you were wrongfully imprisoned for 30 days. Yes, you were wrongfully under a 2-year reduction of liberty, saying that they would throw you in prison if you spoke. It was all wrong. It shouldn't have happened to you. The state were in the wrong. That'll be all. Can you imagine if you did something unlawful for 2 years? What if you lock somebody in your basement for 30 days? Would they say, you shouldn't have done that, and leave it at that? Are they for real? Are they for real? If you lock somebody in your basement for 30 days and told them they couldn't talk for 2 years or you're going to lock them in your basement again, what do you think the court would do to you? They committed very, very serious crime against myself personally, but the Irish people, the Irish Constitution, and they committed very serious treason. And I don't think that Miss Justice Siobhan Phelan is in it on her own. I think she might have come under some pressure to do what she did and to not do what she should have. I don't think she acted alone. I think she might have come under some pressure there. So whatever the case, she needs to clean up her mess. Big time. Because it doesn't matter what time period it is, or what law school you went to, that ruling which is now up online is treason. It's treason, and it's not going anywhere. It doesn't matter how long it has been since that court case. That does not come into play when somebody commits treason. It doesn't. Oh, if you had wanted to say something about that, you should have said it within 6 months. Absolute poppycock. If it was then the responsibility of the judge to do it, it's still the responsibility of the judge to do it, irrespective of the passage of time. This is not about plenary proceedings. I'm not trying to appeal the judge's decision. This is something that should have happened and didn't. I'm not trying to claim from the state for tripping over a pothole that the county council should have filled in. I'm talking about I was wrongfully imprisoned, and the state have already recognised that by ruling of the High Court and did nothing to compensate me. But when it went to the Court of Appeal, they threw 150 quid at me for court costs. Why? Why did they throw 150 quid at me for court costs? Because they're acknowledging that I shouldn't have been dragged up there in the first place, given the result of the hearing. But it also shows that the position of the state should be compensate this man. €150? Are you for real? €150 for 2 years reduction of liberty? €150 for 30 days of wrongful imprisonment? And what about the test you failed to carry out of the sections 115 and 117 of the Constitution, which actually brought about those wrongful imprisonments and reductions of liberty? What about them? Have they lost the plot? Do they think they can just commit treason now in the High Court and that's it, tickety-boo? That's not how it works. These are not plenary proceedings. It's not like we're going to go now and seek costs or seek compensate. No. It's the responsibility of the state, when they rule that the injustice has been done, to reprimand and make restitution. That should have been done in the same court case. Do you understand? It should have been actually part of the proceedings. Because once the judge says this man was wrongfully imprisoned, next question is, what are you going to do about it? That's the next natural question. It's like, you put somebody in your basement for 30 days and you shouldn't have. What are you going to do about it? So how have the state actually been reprimanded? How has their wrongful behaviour cost them? €150 for the day in court? Are you having a laugh? That's the position of the state. That's the position of the judiciary, the Law Society, the Government of Ireland. If a man is thrown in prison for 30 days, nothing about it. Treason. This is very serious now.